They laughed as the alien girl starved, until one human whispered, "You can eat with me."
The rain hadn't stopped in 2 days. It wasn't dramatic rain, just a dull, steady drizzle that smeared the skylight domes of Orvan docks with gray. The type of rain that pooled in low cracks, leaked through ventilation seams, and left clothing damp for hours. This section of the port, the cargo overflow lanes and half-abandoned trade squares, was where the cheap leases and underfunded merchants clustered. Too far from the terminals to be important, too close to the incinerator towers to be comfortable. The alley beneath Dock Row's vending canopy had once sold processed snacks to inbound crews. Now the machines stood gutted, screens shattered, card readers pried out. Their empty compartments held only plastic wrappers and mold. Below them, between a rusted crate and a cracked coolant pipe, a figure remained nearly invisible. She had been lying there since the previous night. Her name was Rionel, born of the Orenyi, an exiled species whose orbital homes had been stripped for mineral composites and repurposed into manufacturing moons. Her people, once artisans and culture keepers, now wandered starports in fragments. Some worked under contract. Some fell into servitude. Some, like Rionel, simply disappeared. Her body was still, arms curled inward to conserve heat. Thin purple skin stretched tightly over her frame. The color faded near her joints. Her long white hair was matted against her face and shoulders, soaked from condensation. She wore only a net fiber shawl, thin, frayed, and translucent in places, knotted across her chest and hips. It had once been ceremonial. Now it barely covered her. Her thoughts didn't follow full sentences anymore. Just fragments. Cold. Caution. Do not speak. Wait. No eye contact. She had tried begging the first night. One merchant had laughed. Another asked what she'd trade. She hadn't spoken since. The last thing she ate was the tail of a heat-sealed protein stick dropped near a trash bin. 3 days ago, maybe 4. The nights blurred. Footsteps approached. Not fast. Not loud. Heavy enough to be male. Close enough that she could smell cloth warmed by body heat, the faint chemical bite of rehydrated starch. She kept her face down. Then something changed. The steps didn't pass. They paused. Shifted weight. A rustle of a bag being set down. She forced herself to glance sideways, moving only her eyes. A human man crouched beside her. Mid-30s. Light brown skin. Narrow face. Unshaven jawline. Wet strands of dark hair stuck to his forehead. His coat was long, beige, stained at the edges, the kind of fabric port workers wore until it fell apart. A threadbare, synth denim shirt peeked through beneath the open collar. His boots were scuffed from years of use. He didn't speak. He opened a dented thermos and poured something steaming into the lid cup. From his coat pocket, he unwrapped a half sandwich, wrapped in wax paper. Something bread-like, thick with protein spread. He slid it gently across the ground toward her. Rionel didn't move. Her mind raced. Was it bait? A trick? Was he going to demand something afterward? Her stomach cramped so hard it shook her breath. She stared at the food, then at him. His expression was blank. Not mocking. Not expectant. Not even overly kind. Just watching. She stretched out one hand slowly. Fingers touched the wax paper. He didn't flinch. She pulled it closer. Bit once. Her teeth hurt from the effort. She swallowed, waited to see what came next. "You'd share this with me?" she rasped. Her voice was dry, thin. Her throat raw. He nodded once. "You need it more." He didn't ask questions. Didn't offer help. She kept eating in small bites. The steam from his drink curled into the air. She could smell broth. Her mouth watered, but she didn't ask. He didn't offer it. After a few minutes, he packed up, capped the thermos, and stood. Slid the strap of his bag over his shoulder. Looked down once more. "You should stay out of the drainage lane. It floods at night." Then he walked away. Malric Thane didn't work for law enforcement. He wasn't a soldier or a medic. His job was simple: cataloging manifest discrepancies between inbound haulers and their port registration sheets. He sat in a dusty office behind the automated freight scanners, cross-referencing dates, registry codes, and delivery authorizations. His days were silent, mechanical, and unnoticed by almost everyone. He wasn't supposed to be near the vending strip. It was on the way to a back entrance he used when the main corridors flooded. He hadn't expected to see her, didn't plan to stop, but something about how still she sat, how she didn't reach for anything, didn't even ask, had caught him in a way he hadn't understood. He hadn't spoken about it to anyone at work. He rarely spoke at all. His shift ended 12 hours later. Rain still fell. On instinct, he took the back way again. When he turned the corner, she wasn't there. Then he spotted her, across the alley, standing near the shadows under a stack of crates. Still barefoot, still watching. He hesitated. "Come on then," he said. Not loud, not kind, just letting her decide. She followed, slowly, limping slightly. Neither spoke during the walk. His apartment was a small rental block unit 2 levels above a maintenance chute. One room, no kitchen divider. Just a low bed, a battered metal sink, a fold-out table with mismatched chairs, and a soft heater vent below the screen wall. The smell of mildew lingered near the ceiling fan. He stepped inside and held the door open. She stood in the hall. Her breath was uneven. She waited for the catch, the command, the price, the joke. It never came. "You're dripping. Come in or don't," he said. She walked in, sat directly on the floor, not curled like before, just with her legs folded tight beneath her and hands resting between them. Her bones pressed sharp under her skin. He moved to the small prep counter and started boiling water. She flinched at the sound of the burner ignition, but didn't move. He didn't ask her name, didn't offer his. When the broth was ready, he set it down in front of her on the floor. Not too close. Then he walked to the couch and sat. She sipped it slowly, careful not to spill. Her hands trembled. After, she lay on her side against the wall and pulled her knees to her chest. He didn't offer the bed. She didn't ask. He dimmed the lights and rolled a blanket onto the floor. Neither of them slept much. In the morning, she was gone. But that night, when he returned from work, drenched, exhausted, carrying a fresh ration kit, he found her sitting on the stairs outside the door. She held something in her lap, a piece of cloth. It was one of his old undershirts, taken from the laundry rack. She didn't speak, just looked up at him. He stepped aside. She entered, sat cross-legged on the floor, and unfolded the shirt. Slipped it on slowly, carefully, like it was part of some ritual. The shirt hung loose, slipping off one shoulder. She tightened the knot of her shawl beneath it. He handed her a sealed meal pack. She opened it, ate. She stayed. Neither of them said what this was. There was no agreement, no rules. But something had changed. Not because he saved her, because he saw her. And he stayed. The shirt still smelled faintly of industrial soap and old sweat. Rhiannell curled on the far end of the couch, legs folded beneath her, arms crossed loosely over her chest, as if still unsure she was allowed to rest. Malric sat at the table with a lukewarm bowl of rehydrated stew, his attention half on the wall screen, half on the girl who hadn't spoken more than 4 words in 24 hours. He didn't ask her name, not because he didn't care. He just wasn't sure if she'd give it. Instead, he watched how she moved, carefully, slowly, like she'd learned to anticipate pain. She glanced at every sound, even small ones. Her eyes lingered longer on corners than on people. The old shirt hung long over her thighs, tied loosely at the waist with a scrap of blanket she'd pulled from the utility shelf. One shoulder stayed exposed, the fabric slipping as she shifted. Her skin was marked, faint abrasions across her upper arms. Older bruises faded to yellow-green tones on her hips and thighs. They weren't fresh, but they told a story. Malric didn't stare, but he saw. She looked cleaner now. Not fully. Her hair still knotted, her hands still stained from days without washing. But her face had softened slightly. The permanent tightness around her mouth had relaxed. He stood and walked toward the sink. "You hungry again?" She flinched slightly at the sound of his voice, then nodded once. He poured water into the pot, turned on the stove, and opened another ration. A thick lentil paste, bland but warm. He didn't add seasoning. He hadn't thought to ask if she could digest local additives. He filled 2 bowls and brought them over. This time, she took the bowl without hesitation. Malric sat across from her, knees drawn up beside the fold-out table, watching her eat in careful bites. She didn't speak, but she looked at him directly now. He spoke first. "You were at Dock Row a while." A pause. She chewed, swallowed. 5 days, she said, voice raspier than before, like sand in her throat. He nodded, waited. "I tried the upper terminals. Too many patrols." "Where were you before that?" Her eyes narrowed. A flicker of hesitation. "Storage silo behind a market. Got chased out." He didn't press. Rhiannon stirred the paste in her bowl slowly. "Before that?" "I don't know. I just kept moving." The silence stretched between them. Malric didn't try to fill it. He was used to silence. But he sensed something else under her tone, not vagueness. Fear. Not of him, exactly. Just of saying too much. Or being known. "Where are your people?" he asked. "They're gone." That wasn't vague. That was final. He let that sit. Rhiannon didn't cry. Didn't look away. She just ate. Then leaned back against the couch and tucked her feet beneath the oversized shirt. Malric stood and collected the empty bowls. He ran them under the tap, dried them, set them aside. "I can leave the door locked if you want," he said. She blinked. "Locked? From the inside? You'd have the code." Rhiannon stared at him like she was searching for the part he left out. The condition. The favor he wanted. He gave none. Eventually, she spoke again. "Why did you stop?" He looked up from the sink. "You didn't ask for anything." Her head tilted slightly. "People don't stop unless they want something." "I know. And you?" Malric dried his hands, sat back down across from her. "I was just tired of pretending I didn't see." That landed heavier than he expected. She looked away, face unreadable. That night, she used the shower. He heard the water run for 20 minutes. The bathroom door didn't close all the way. It jammed unless you pulled it hard, but she used a towel to wedge it mostly shut. Steam drifted out. Malric didn't watch. He stayed on the far side of the apartment, lying on his floor mat, eyes on the ceiling, listening to the water. When it stopped, he didn't look up. She patted out quietly, damp feet on tile, the slow drag of towel against skin. She didn't speak, just moved across the room and curled onto the couch again. The next morning, he woke to the smell of heated broth. She was stirring the pot. No words passed between them. 2 more days passed like that. Quiet cohabitation, share meals, minimal questions. He gave her a new bar of soap, a clean towel, let her choose when to speak. She used the couch as if it were hers now. Not out of comfort, just necessity. She never entered the bedroom corner, never touched his personal things. But she did fold his laundry without being asked, clean the sink, align the ration packs in order of expiration. On the 3rd evening, she asked a question. "You live alone?" "Yeah, always. Since I moved here. It's cheaper near the ducks." She nodded slowly, looked toward the vent. "You don't touch me." "No, most would've." He didn't answer. He just looked at her. "Do you want to?" she asked. That made him pause, not out of embarrassment, but because of how she said it flatly, like she was offering water. "I won't take anything you don't give," he said. His voice didn't rise. It was calm, honest. She didn't reply, but she didn't pull away either. That night, she pulled the blanket off the couch and curled up on the floor next to his mat. Not touching, just near. He said nothing. She closed her eyes. Somewhere between that moment and the next morning, something shifted. She started brushing her hair, what little she could with her fingers. She used his shirt like it belonged to her. Her eyes stopped darting at every sound. But one question still hung between them, unspoken. Why was she here? Not in his apartment, not in Orvin Docks, but here, still breathing, still walking when her people were gone. He didn't ask. Not yet. He would wait until she told him on her own. And when she did, he'd be ready to listen. Malric stepped off the service tram just after second cycle, the industrial mist clinging to his coat before he'd even reached the alley stair. His shift had run late again, some mislogged hauler paperwork flagged by Central. He didn't argue. He never did. He just stayed until the logs cleared and left without a word. It was easier that way. The door to his apartment was still locked when he reached it. That meant she hadn't left. He entered quietly, set his shoulder bag down, and scanned the room. She wasn't on the couch. Then he heard it, soft shuffling from the corner near the heater duct. He leaned slightly, eyes narrowing. Rhiannon sat on the floor, legs folded under her, arms tucked around a sealed ration pack she hadn't opened. The shirt she wore was his old one still, though she'd tied the sleeves tighter now. Her hair was damp, combed partially straight with her fingers. She found a cloth scrap to tie it back. Her eyes met his, and this time she didn't flinch. He stepped out of his boots. "You ate." She shook her head. "I waited." "You didn't have to." "I know." That was new. That small, simple confidence. Not defiant, just certain. She set the pack down, stood, walked to the stove, and switched on the burner. She'd learned which dial stuck, which flame was too high. She opened a pack of rice broth and poured in water without asking. Malric moved to the table and sat, watched her without speaking. "You always come back late," she said, stirring slowly. "They extend hours when backlog builds." She turned slightly. "Why do you stay in a job like that?" He hesitated, not because it was a hard question, just because no one had asked before. "It's quiet," he said, "and no one bothers me." Rhiannell set the pot to simmer and leaned against the counter. Her arms folded under her chest, her posture relaxed but not careless. Her eyes wandered to the window, where the condensation clung like dust. "Is that enough?" she asked. He didn't answer right away. When he finally did, his voice was low. "It used to be." She nodded slowly, didn't ask more. They ate quietly. Afterward, she washed the bowls. That night, when he lay on the floor mat, she didn't sleep beside him. She stood near the window, watching the lights flicker from the far terminal gates. Then she spoke. "My family was rounded during the Exodus. I was 15. They told us we were being reassigned for planetary transition. We boarded a hauler. Half the pods never opened." Malric sat up slowly, not interrupting, just listening. "I survived because my pod cracked a seal mid-flight. They pulled me off thinking I was dead weight." Her voice was even, not emotional but not numb, just controlled. "They left me at a freight outpost near the Dasari Belt. I worked, did whatever was needed to stay fed. When that collapsed, I drifted here. This port's large enough to disappear in." Silence returned. She turned from the window. "You're the first person who looked at me like I was still real." He stood and crossed the room. Didn't touch her, just stood beside her, shoulder to shoulder. She leaned into him. "I didn't think I could want anything again," she said. "You don't have to," he replied. "Wanting something isn't a debt." Her eyes closed for a moment, slow and tired. Then came the quietest part. "Do you think I could stay?" His answer came instantly. "Yes." She exhaled, a long breath that sounded more like surrender than relief. Her hands curled slightly, not in a fist, but something close to holding. Malric moved to the couch and sat. She followed without speaking, sat beside him. He looked over and for the first time asked, "What's your name?" "Rhiannell," she said. "Just Rhiannell. No clan, no title." He nodded once. "I'm Malric." "I know." They sat together in the dim light. The city hummed outside like a quiet engine. She leaned into him gently, her head brushing his shoulder. And as the room settled, her body eased. Not in seduction, not in need, just the slow release of someone no longer bracing for pain. The question that had been hanging since the first chapter, who is she, where did she come from, why is she here, had finally been answered. But it wasn't her story alone that was changing. Something had shifted in him too. He no longer went through his days just to get through them. Now, he came home for something, for someone. And for the first time in years, that meant something real. The next morning began earlier than usual. Malric stirred awake to the scent of something slightly burnt and faintly sweet. Not synthetic, not packaged. He sat up from the floor mat, blinking against the dim ambient light filtering in through the wall screen. The room was warm, warmer than normal. Rhiannell stood by the stove, barefoot, hair tied up in a rough coil with a twine loop from a shipping bag. She wore the same oversized shirt, now tucked slightly tighter at the waist, sleeves rolled back to her elbows. Her thin frame moved with cautious rhythm. Her back was to him. He rose quietly and stepped closer. "You're cooking," he said. She didn't jump, just turned her head enough to glance over her shoulder. "I used to help in a kitchen. Years ago. We had a stretch rations." "What is it?" "Rice mush with fruit powder. Not much else." He moved to the sink, washed his face, dried his hands, then stepped behind her and poured water into a clean cup. "Smells better than the usual." "You were always feeding me," she said softly. I wanted to do it once. That landed somewhere deep in his chest. He didn't reply, just nodded and sat at the table. She served the mush in 2 small cups, brought them over, and sat across from him. They ate in silence, but it was a new kind of quiet now, mutual, unstrained. She looked directly at him more often, and her posture had changed, less folded inward. Her shoulders held straighter, still thin, still recovering, but no longer bracing. Halfway through the meal, she spoke. You don't ask much about me. I figured you'd talk when you were ready. She toyed with her spoon for a moment. I lied before, not about the exodus, but about what happened after. I didn't just drift here. Malric raised his eyes, but didn't interrupt. I escaped from a contract post. Not legally. They marked me defective because of a chest infection. I was losing weight. They locked me in an air cell with others waiting for offload. I got out during a power brownout, hid in the freight hull. When I reached Orvin, I ran. And I didn't stop. She looked down into her bowl, the last clumps of rice soaking in pinkish syrup. I thought someone might report me if they saw me eating. So I stopped. Malric leaned forward. No one's reporting anything here. She met his eyes. I know that now. That admission, small but raw, answered something unspoken from earlier chapters. Why she never asked for help, never even looked directly at the food when he first offered it. It wasn't just survival instinct. It was fear of being seen, cataloged, flagged, pulled back into a system that had erased her before. He breathed out slowly. If they ever come asking, you're not here. You're nobody to them. Just someone helping me keep a small place clean. She smiled barely. Then I'd better clean it properly. Later that day, while Malric was at work, Rhiannon stayed inside. The door was locked with the 4-digit code he had shown her. She'd memorized it instantly. She used the time to open the supply cabinet, reorganize the food packs by expiration date, and quietly sweep out the corners of dust buildup. She found a broken utensil under the sink and discarded it. She aired out the bedding, wiped down the screen panel. It wasn't about repaying him. It was something else, reclaiming routine, normalcy, ownership of a day. When he returned late in the evening, still damp from rain, he paused at the doorway. The room smelled clean, warm. A soft light from the side lamp replaced the usual overhead flicker. She looked up from the couch. He raised an eyebrow. You did all this today. I didn't break anything. I'm not worried about that. She stood, stretched her arms slightly, then walked to the table and pointed to a sealed food pack. I thought we'd try one of the bean stews. The one you never opened. That one's spicy. I figured you could handle it. He allowed a dry smile and removed his coat. Let's find out. They cooked together. She moved with a quiet focus, not afraid to bump into him now. Occasionally, their hands brushed. Her fingers stayed a moment longer each time before pulling away. Later, while the stew simmered, she touched the side of his shoulder. He turned. She looked at him seriously. If someone came to the door tomorrow and said I belong somewhere else, would you give me back? No, he said, even if it got you in trouble. Yes. She stepped closer. Her voice was quiet. Why? Because you don't belong to anyone. She didn't cry, but something broke in her chest at that. A release, like pressure had eased under her ribs. I like to stay, she whispered. Not just sleep here, not just hide. He nodded once. Then you stay. That night, she didn't curl up on the floor. She didn't take the couch. She stood by the side of his mat, waiting. He looked up, questioning. She slid down beside him, slowly, carefully, and rested her head against his chest. His hand hovered near her shoulder for a second, then settled gently, not to claim, but to reassure. Her eyes closed. They didn't speak again. And for the first time since the story began, Rhiannon didn't feel like a guest, or a burden, or a fugitive. She felt simply present, alive, wanted, and safe. Malric woke before the first light hum of port traffic, not to an alarm, not even to the usual groan of pipe pressure in the wall, but to warmth. Rhiannon lay beside him, curled and close, face near his shoulder, one arm loosely draped across his chest. Her breathing was slow and shallow. Her hair, half dry and tangled, spread across the pillow and part of his neck. The oversized shirt she wore had ridden up slightly as she slept, revealing the soft curve of her hip and the narrow edge of her waist. He didn't move. Not yet. He didn't want to startle her. And truthfully, he wasn't sure he wanted to break the moment at all. For someone who had once flinched at footsteps, she was now sleeping against him like it was natural. It didn't feel fragile. It felt real. After a few quiet minutes, her eyes blinked open. She shifted, sensing him awake, and stiffened slightly, like she just remembered where she was. Her hand slowly withdrew from his chest. "You okay?" he asked. She nodded. "Didn't mean to fall asleep like that. You can sleep wherever you want." She didn't respond right away, just looked at him. Her gaze was unguarded now. No suspicion, no calculation, just tired truth. "I didn't dream," she said. His brows furrowed. "That's good. I haven't had a night without dreams since I left the silo." He didn't push further. Instead, he sat up and stretched, careful not to let the blanket drag across her. He stood, pulled on his shirt, and walked to the small counter. The port's artificial light was beginning to filter in through the fogged window. It cast long silver lines across the floor. Rhiannon remained where she was, legs curled beneath the blanket now, watching him, present but not anxious. Her arms were folded across her middle like she was holding something in. Then, after a beat, she asked it, "What do you think this is?" He turned slightly. "You and me?" She nodded. "I think it's the first thing I haven't wanted to walk away from in a long time," he said. Her throat tightened at that. She looked away, blinking quickly. He crossed the room, slowly, and sat at the edge of the couch near her feet. "You don't have to define it today." "I know," she whispered, "but I think I want to." They didn't speak for a while after that. Just the quiet, humming weight of something unspoken growing into something acknowledged. Later that morning, she pulled on his long overcoat over her usual shirt and stepped outside with him for the first time. He didn't suggest it. She asked, "Just a walk, around the block." Malric hesitated but nodded. The dock lane was never truly safe, not because of violence, but because of how invisible people like her became out there. Still, he said yes. They stayed close to the wall shadows, passing loading crates, and silent storefronts shuttered for repairs. A hauler buzzed low overhead, causing dust to kick up from a drainage vent. No one stopped them. No one looked twice. She stayed near him the entire time. Her hand occasionally brushed his coat sleeve, like checking that he was still real. They circled the back maintenance corridor and returned 20 minutes later. She didn't speak once during the walk, but when they stepped inside again, she exhaled deeply. "You did that for me," she said. "No, I just walked next to you." Her voice was soft. "Same thing." That evening, she asked to wash his clothes. Not out of duty, not to repay him. It was how she said it. "Let me help with something," that told him it came from her. He handed her the faded work shirt and 2 extra sets. She carefully soaked them in a plastic basin, scrubbing with a brush she'd found in the supply drawer. When she was done, she sat on the floor near the heating vent, legs curled beneath her again, watching the fabric dry in the artificial warmth. Malric knelt beside her, handed her a mug of warm broth. She sipped, then looked at him again. "You don't touch me unless I move first." "That okay?" "Yes." "Do you want more than that?" Rhiannon paused. Her hand closed around the mug. "I don't know yet," she said quietly. "But if I ever want that, it would be with you." He didn't reach for her. He didn't lean in. He just sat beside her in silence. And that, in itself, was everything she needed. Not taking, not saving, just staying. The third night she slept beside him, she reached for his hand. It wasn't a bold move, just a slow, conscious gesture in the dark. Her fingers slipping across the floor mat, brushing his knuckles, then curling into his palm. Malric had been half awake, still listening to the low hum of the vent and the distant grind of dock machinery. But when her skin touched his, he didn't move. He only turned his head slightly, eyes open to the ceiling, and gently returned the grip. She said nothing. Neither did he. Her fingers stayed in his for the rest of the night. By morning, he found her already up, standing by the stove in silence, bare feet planted firmly on the cool metal floor. The old shirt she wore dipped slightly from one shoulder, her back narrow and tense. He stepped closer, slowly. Her posture softened. "I couldn't sleep after that," she said without turning. "Not because I was afraid. I just kept thinking about things." He didn't ask what things. She turned the stove off, poured hot broth into 2 bowls, brought them to the table. They sat. "I want to talk about something," she said, voice low, clear. He nodded. "I've had people touch me before. Some were rough. Some pretended to be kind. But it was always about them, what they wanted, how quickly I could give it." Her eyes didn't leave his face. "You haven't done that. Not once. I never will." "I know," she said. She reached out again, across the table. Her fingertips touched his wrist, light and intentional. "But if I ask you to touch me, on my terms, would you?" He kept his eyes steady. "Yes, only if you're sure." "I am." No words passed after that. Later that day, they showered together. The bathroom was small. There was no ceremony, no seduction, just slow movements, awkward adjustments. She stood behind him first, letting the hot water run down her shoulders, watching as he rinsed his hair. He turned, waited for her cue. She gave it by placing his hand on her waist. He kept it there. No grabbing, no pulling, only presence. She leaned into him under the water, her body trembling not from fear, but from memory. Her breath hitched against his chest. His arms closed around her slowly, gently, like bracing someone through a long fall. Her fingers traced his ribs, his back, then rested flat over his heart. "I want to remember what it's like to feel safe," she whispered. "You already are." She kissed him then, softly. No hunger, just slow, trembling closeness. Later, wrapped in a towel, she stepped barefoot across the floor to the mat where he sat. Her hair was still damp, falling in loose strands over her cheekbones. The oversized shirt was back on her, now worn differently, chosen rather than needed. She sat in his lap. "I don't feel broken anymore," she said. "Just rebuilding." Malric pressed his forehead to hers. "We take our time." That evening, she found an old box of adhesive notes near the data terminal. Inside were outdated forms, surplus pens, and a worn manual for the manifest registry system. She took one of the notes, scribbled something in sharp, blocky strokes, and stuck it to the top cabinet above the stove. Malric passed by a moment later and paused. It read, "Not a guest, not a burden. I live here." He stared at the note for a while. Then he smiled. Later that night, she folded his spare shirt and placed it neatly beside his work clothes. And for the first time, she pulled back the sheet on the bed. Not as a visitor, not as a fugitive, but as someone choosing to share space. Choosing him. No permission, no hesitation. She simply slipped under the blanket and waited. When he joined her, there was no tension. Only warmth, only belonging. And sleep came easily for both of them. By the end of the week, something had shifted in the apartment. Not just in the way it looked, but in the way it felt. The old blanket Rionel used to curl up and was now folded neatly at the foot of the bed. The couch had been wiped clean and rearranged slightly to face the window. 2 mugs rested on the table instead of one. Her presence wasn't just tolerated, it had weight now, shape. She belonged in the space. The room had adapted to include her, and Malric had adapted with it. He arrived home earlier that day, earlier than he usually dared. He stopped at the corner supply booth near Sector D and picked up a small bundle of dried green roots she'd pointed out once. Used to brew a bitter drink from her homeworld. He didn't ask if she still liked it. He just bought it. When he opened the door, she was there, standing at the shelf, examining one of his data chips. She glanced over her shoulder at the sound of the door, then back at the chip. "You really log arrival manifest by hand?" "Some still require verification signatures," he replied, setting down the bag. "That's archaic. Welcome to Orvin." She smirked. It was still new, that expression. Her face had learned to smile again slowly, like a body recovering from frostbite. She approached, took the small package from his hands, opened it, and raised it to her nose. She inhaled, then looked up at him with something softer than gratitude. "You remembered. I was listening." She stepped forward and kissed his cheek. Brief, natural, unperformed. He made tea. She cooked. They ate in silence for a while, but it wasn't empty. It was comfort. Later, she stood at the wall terminal with a brush in one hand, gently working through her long white hair. He sat across from her, one leg tucked up on the chair, watching her movements with quiet attention. "You used to look like you were always about to run," he said. I was And now, she paused. Now I wait for you to come back. Her tone wasn't sentimental. It was factual, and yet it struck him with more force than any confession could. You ever think about going further? He asked. Past Orvin. She tilted her head. Do you? I used to, but I never had a reason to pack. She set the brush down, walked over, sat on the floor between his legs, back to his chest. Maybe we look together, she said. Later, when we're ready. He rested his arms around her waist. No tension, no urgency. You want to leave? He asked. I want to choose. That's different. They sat like that for a long time, the vent humming quietly behind them, the light outside dimming as another dock cycle ended. When she finally stood, she reached into the cabinet and pulled out a small tin, the one she kept her few personal items in. From it, she removed a cloth strip embroidered with fine silver thread, worn but still intact. She unfolded it and placed it in his hands. This was the last thing I owned before everything was taken, she said. I've never shown it to anyone. He traced the stitching gently. It was precise, patterned in looping shapes, perhaps symbols from her culture, or just personal design. I don't want to keep it, she said, but I want to hear. He didn't say anything, just held it with both hands, then laid it carefully inside his drawer. She leaned against the wall, arms crossed. I'm not afraid anymore, she said. He turned. I used to think I was nothing, that I was supposed to be passed around, discarded. But you, her voice wavered slightly. She held it steady. You didn't change what happened to me. You didn't erase it, but you gave me something to reach for again. She stepped closer, and when I reach for you, you don't move away. Malric's voice was quiet. I never will. She nodded once. Then, without speaking, she took his hand and guided him to the bed. Not with urgency, not with seduction, but with choice. When they lay down, she rested her forehead against his. Not because I need to survive, she whispered. Because I want to live. His reply was a breath, warm, steady, full of something wordless and entire. The room dimmed. The vent whispered, and in the quiet dark, they held each other like people who had stopped counting the days they were alone. Tomorrow was still uncertain. But tonight, this moment belonged only to them. The heater hummed softly in the background, the same low vibration that had filled the apartment since Rhiannell's first night on the couch. But now it no longer felt like a backdrop to survival. It was part of a space they shared, a space that had changed without ceremony, without announcement, just quietly like a new season arriving. Rhiannell stood at the window, barefoot, arms crossed, wearing the same oversized shirt she'd come to treat as her own. Her hair was clean now, brushed, and tied into a loose tail. The bruises were gone. Her weight had returned, slowly, over time. Her face no longer looked hollow. The light in her eyes no longer flickered in fear. She wasn't hiding anymore. Behind her, Malric packed a small bag near the foot of the bed. A few rolled shirts, a charger node, a small thermal kettle. Nothing urgent, nothing rushed. He looked up. Still want to do this? She nodded without turning. We leave tomorrow. Not forever, but far enough that it's ours. He zipped the bag. I registered a sleeper berth. Civilian hauler. No questions asked. She glanced over her shoulder. Do you think we'll ever have to explain any of this? No one asked how we got here, he said. I doubt they'll care where we go. Rhiannell smiled. Not wide, just enough to be sure of herself. She turned and walked to the cabinet, pulled out the cloth strip she had given him nights ago, the only item she'd kept from before. She folded it once, tied it around her wrist. He watched her do it in silence. Then she walked to the table, placed her hands flat against the surface, and stood still for a moment. I want to tell you something, she said. He looked up. I wasn't sure I was a person anymore. Not after the camps. Not after Orvin. You didn't fix that. You didn't try to rescue me. You just stayed. She looked at him, and that gave me room to exist. He stepped beside her, rested one hand on hers. I didn't know how to be anything else, but you were what I needed. They didn't cry. It wasn't that kind of moment. Instead, she stepped in close, kissed him slowly, deliberately. Her hands rested against his sides. His arms circled her waist. They held each other without urgency, without hesitation. That night, they packed the last of their things. She chose what to take, A few clothes, one ration box she still liked, and a spare datapad they could log new locations with. Malric brought the thermos she'd first drunk from, the same one he'd set down beside her in the rain. The apartment didn't feel like a prison. It had been a shelter, a cocoon, but it was time. At sunrise, the dock lights cast long shadows across the corridor as they walked side by side to the hauler terminal. She wore his coat now, sleeves rolled twice. He carried the bag. She carried the thermos. They didn't speak much. They didn't need to. Before boarding, she stopped just short of the ramp, turned, looked back toward the sector she once starred in. Then she looked up at him. "Thank you for feeding me." His reply was simple, honest. "Thank you for staying." They boarded together. Weeks later, in a smaller port orbiting a warmer moon, Malric updated their registry data. Civilian file. No flags. No pursuers. When asked if the second occupant was a dependent, he said, "She's my partner." And for the first time in her life, Rhiannon stood behind someone who didn't flinch from saying it. They lived quietly, together. She cooked. He read. She talked more. He smiled more. They touched often, small things, brushing hands, leaning shoulders, a shared glance in the silence. No one laughed at her anymore. She ate with him, slept beside him, woke up warm. The story didn't need drama. It only needed to end with something true. Two people who didn't know each other anything, still choosing each other every single day. And in that choice, they found what they both lost. A future, a home, and finally, peace. Some days later, the new port was smaller, quieter. No steel towers, no echoing cargo alarms. Just low-roof trade, offices built into carved rock, shaded walkways draped in hanging lights, and old tiles warmed by sunlight filtered through the colony dome. A market opened twice a week. Water was recycled but clean. There were no guards, no scanners, no questions. Rhiannon sat on the shaded bench outside their new unit. Her legs were tucked under her, a linen wrap gathered at her hips. A warm breeze drifted across the courtyard, stirring strands of her long white hair. She sipped tea slowly, breathing evenly, eyes half-lidded from rest. A cluster of native birds chirped from the cables overhead. Inside, Malric finished bolting the storage shelf. It didn't wobble anymore. He set down the drill, stretched, and wiped his hands on his shirt. She glanced back toward the open doorway. "You finally fixed that thing," she said, not hiding her amusement. "It's only been broken since we moved in." 3 days ago, he stepped outside, squinting into the filtered sun. She shifted, made room beside her. He sat. Their arms touched. "I could get used to this," she said, eyes on the sky. He nodded. "Feels like a place we weren't just passing through." They watched the clouds drift past the dome's edge. After a while, she turned toward him. "I was thinking," she said, "we've survived the worst of it. Found a place. A name. Safety." He looked at her, waiting. She brushed a hand against his thigh, slow, deliberate. Her fingers lingered. "I want you," she said. "Not because I'm healing. Not because I'm grateful. Because I choose to want you." He didn't speak. Just search her eyes. What he saw wasn't uncertainty. It was invitation. Not need, desire. Not desperate, but calm, steady, open. She stood and walked back inside, barefoot. He followed. The bedroom was small but clean. 2 blankets folded on the edge of the bed, a thin breeze drifting in through the open wall slit above the headboard. Outside, insects buzzed softly under the late afternoon sun. She stood near the bed and unknotted the linen wrap. It slid down around her ankles, slow and silent. She didn't look away from him. She wanted to be seen, fully, not for survival, not for bargaining, just because she was here in her own body by choice. He stepped forward and placed his hands gently on her waist. She tilted her head slightly, waiting, not tense. He leaned down, brushing his lips against her collarbone. She closed her eyes. His hands explored slowly, tracing the shape of her hips, the curve of her back, the places she used to hide. She breathed steadily, arms wrapping around his shoulders, pulling herself closer. Skin to skin. No shame, no hesitation. He undressed carefully, never in a rush. She helped, tugging at his shirt with slow fingers, unbuckling his belt without looking down. When they stood together, nothing between them, the silence said everything. She guided him to the bed. They lay together in the fading light, her body wrapped around his, legs entwined. He kissed her slowly, deeply, as his hands moved across her thighs, her stomach, her ribs. She moaned softly, not from pain, not from shock, but from trust, from years of waiting to feel this, not taken, not owed, just theirs. Her hands roamed his chest, fingers tracing old scars and skin he never let anyone see. She whispered things he didn't expect to hear, gentle affirmations, words in her native tongue. When she pulled him closer, when their bodies finally pressed, the motion was slow, intimate, purposeful. They moved in rhythm. There was no dominance, no power struggle, just tension easing, breaths shared, sweat blooming between them. He gripped her lower back, not to hold her down, but to keep her close. Her fingers dug into his shoulders, her head tipped back, mouth open in quiet pleasure. They didn't speak for a long time. Afterward, she lay against him, one leg over his chest, rising and falling against his ribs. Her fingers traced circles over his skin. "I wanted this before," she murmured, "but I wasn't ready." He kissed the top of her head. "You were always allowed to take your time." She pulled the blanket over their legs. "I didn't expect it to feel like this." "Like what?" "Like I'm alive. All the way." He held her until she drifted to sleep, limbs tangled with his. No barriers, no fear, just warmth and weight and share breath. Outside, the port lights dimmed. A night bell rang faintly from the market corridor. Inside, two people who had once been strangers held each other in a silence that asked for nothing more. And for the first time, they didn't dream about surviving. They dreamed about staying.